from the last few weeks in Owen's actual writings. So 2 pages back there, one's front and back, one's just the front. That should be plenty. So let's begin. I'll start us off in prayer. Lord, thank you for today. Thank you for this chance, this holy leisure on the Sabbath to gather, to study together, to consider the lives of saints who've gone before us, the times in which they lived, the ways in which they sought to do good for your church and your kingdom and the nation in which they lived, the insights that they had into your dealings and the nature of the human soul and the sin that dwells within us. Lord, I pray that we would ponder these things profitably and well today, that you would give facility to all of us as we seek to understand, as we seek to speak to one another and understand one another. Lord, strengthen our weary bodies for many of us and bless us this day. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. So, we're on to lesson 5 of 6. Almost done. We have, by the end of today, Owen will actually still have 21 more years to live. And Puritanism will have 27 years until really the end of the era. But today, I really want to just zoom in and linger on these 3 years from 1660, about February, to about October of 62. Very, like the last 20 years we've been studying, a lot of flux, a lot of things happening, a lot of things that could have gone various different ways than they did, and lots to consider. So to begin though, 1660, we ended there last year, and I'm going to be working off the Google Doc on my phone a bit today. But to begin with review, as always, we started last week, we were talking about the Protectorate. What was the Protectorate? Who was the Protector? What was all that about? Oliver Cromwell, Lord Protector. A king?
A general who kept being tried to be made king.
Yeah. He did refuse the crown, but was upset that people told him to. Yeah. Reigned for, or had his rule for a while, lots of different parliaments, lots of different constitutions, generally very turbulent times. Was he popular? Yeah. Who are you asking? Still don't ask Ireland, right? Or not even in England much, right? Around those of the independent variety, those who are of his circle, very. Everyone else, no. All right. And then this is the Puritan moment, right? The power for 20 years. The independents really have power for about 10. What happened? Why didn't it work? At least, what did they say? England's not run by independents anymore. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's no unity, no clarity, right? When everything is unsettled, well, people are unsettled, and you get, well, so factionalism, as you've mentioned, right? We also talked about the sectarians. We only talked about them briefly, but in this time of religious liberty and just being religiously unmoored, the entire nation, you get all these radicals popping up, like genuine radicals, not just Baptists. You get like Quakers and ranters and shakers and levelers and crazy people. Like the Quakers, we think of Quakers as Americans as like the nice, peaceful people on the jar of oats, right? They wore conservative clothing, they didn't fight, they were against slavery, generally upstanding citizens. That's not the case in the 1640s. Yeah, like they will literally walk into town naked just to like get people's attention and like cause a trouble. And like that's not exaggeration. That happened multiple times. These are anti-Trinitarian nut jobs. All right, and so this is part of the problem. Like, how can you expect God to be blessing the nation and sending revival when this is happening? But also, like, this is happening because, like, of revival, right? The two tend to happen at the same time. They'll also say, well, the Spirit blows where He wills, and as all this is happening, like, tares are sown among the wheat too, but they're never dealt with. The nation doesn't have a serious way to actually keep the church united. If we're going to keep the independents free, we got to keep these people free. How can we manage to both have a bounded and ordered liberty? But then, at the same time, people don't change, right? A lot of this involves some very personal drama. Well, people don't change. Another word for change, right, is just reform. Sin isn't dealt with. Oliver Cromwell himself, like the trappings of royalty begin to increase and appear, and there's dancing and just general unseriousness and popish levity. And so, 1660, things aren't going so hot. And so we ended last week with King Charles II returning, with great jubilation to most of the city of London, but not to everyone. So I'm going to be a little bit unconventional this morning. I think as most of us were discussing at some points in the last 3 days, it's been a crazy week for a lot of people. I'm actually going to read some from the good Mr. Spur and just some of his account of the time, because he does it very well. He hits the points I was hoping to better than I can. So I've got plenty to intersperse, plenty to ask about as we go through, but let's enter into his narrative of 1660, which he calls the grand lost opportunity. The death of Oliver Cromwell on the 3rd of September 1658 precipitated a crisis which was only resolved by the restoration of a Stuart monarchy. Oliver's ineffective son Richard succeeded as a protector, but resigned office within 10 months. What was left of the Rump Parliament was recalled, but by October 1659, these MPs had been sent packing by a clique of army officers. In November, John Owen wrote to General Monk, commander of the army in Scotland, in the name of all the trembling saints in these nations. In January 1660, General Monk and his army marched south and restored the Long Parliament. This assembly renewed the Solemn League and Covenant, revived the Presbyterian classes, or system of church polity, and declared the Westminster Confession of Faith to be the religion of the land. That's a pretty quick turnaround. All of a sudden, we're back to like a very, very full-throated Presbyterianism by the Scots in the space of 5 months. It's worth mentioning. I don't think we actually talked much about the Solemn League and Covenant, did we? We mentioned it in passing, but this is essentially it's a solemn league, alliance, and covenant, right? To further the reform of the three kingdoms, England, Scotland, and Ireland, along the lines of the best formed churches abroad, to extirpate popery, to defend the king and parliament, and to abolish bishops and deacons, or archdeacons, so the episcopal system of government. Right? That's very briefly the solemn oath now that they've all taken. All right. On the 21st of February, Monk, again the Scottish general, told Parliament that moderate, not rigid Presbyterian government with a sufficient liberty for consciences truly tender appears at present to be the most indifferent and acceptable way to the Church's settlement. The Presbyterian divines Calamy, Reynolds, Manton, and Spurstow were dispatched to Holland to discuss the settlement with Charles Stuart, who's in exile. Presbyterians rejoiced. "Lift up thine eyes, my soul," hymned Oliver Heywood, What a change has been effected in half a year. Surely there is a gracious moving wheel of providence in all these vicissitudes. It seemed like this really might be the chance to build that reformed church and nation for which the Puritans have been striving since the 1570s. All right, here we are. Moderate Presbyterianism seems to be in the offing. Room to work with independents, those with tender consciences. February 1660, this seems very, very likely, even if not inevitable. But while King Charles to be promises this toleration in the Declaration of Veto, he also kind of suggests, makes clear in his very kingly way, that he does expect some bishops to come back. And the prayer book. And even the leading Presbyterians start to realize like there's more of a momentum towards prelacy, towards bishops than we might have first thought. And if we get too much toleration, again, people can take advantage of that, be they Catholics, be they anti-Trinitarians, etc. Still no cause for panic yet. And the idea of a compromise here has been on the table for a long time, right? Particularly the idea of a reduced episcopacy is what it's called. This has been particularly suggested by such godly bishops as James Ussher, Ireland, right? Still a robustly reformed doctrine, still bishops, but having more of a plurality of elders, more of a voice to the lower courts. Effectively, the bishop could, in some of these arrangements, end up as more just like permanent moderator of the assembly with a bit more authority, right? But still not terribly different than what we have even now, with permanence, right? But kind of a meeting in the middle. Even someone like Richard Baxter, who's very, very prominent at this time, when he meets with Archbishop Ussher in 1656, they're able to come to an agreement on a potential plan. It takes them like half an hour, right? The poles are not too far opposite when they're willing to work with each other. Yet, they're not always willing to work with each other. So, this all is instituted in 1660. Note what's not on the table, though. Independency is not on the table. So our good friend John Owen is really not having a good year of it. Right? He was like the leading signature on the petition to call Monk down. And things are not going his way. So he publishes, he's going to publish 3 books, one a year during this time. He publishes a massive, massive work that he'd probably been working on for 3 years at this point, since he was still at Oxford. It is called Theologumena Pantodapa. It has nothing to do with peas, but Theologumena Pantodapa. It's big. It's about 500 pages. It's all in Latin. It currently isn't really accessible. There is one translation of it. So I'll just say briefly. The Banner of Truth works, right? These are just a scan and reprint of the 1860s edition that was printed in London. Back at that time, you could still assume that people who wanted to read the Latin stuff could read the Latin stuff, so Banner did not publish this volume, right? Which is coming at a very critical juncture in Owen's life. It has been published by RHB as Biblical Theology from Adam to Christ. This is not a biblical theology, and that's a pretty lousy translation. All right, so if this book ends up sounding interesting to you over the next 5 minutes, just wait till David Noe finishes his translation at some point in the next few years with Crossway, and it'll be better then, right? The current Stephen Westcott does not understand this book as much as he has tolerable Latin, and the result is Just wait. Just wait. All right. Because this is a weird book, guys. This is a weird book. It's been really neglected in Owen's studies, which is a shame. I know of like 4 people who have written on it, even briefly. I've also done a considerable amount of work with it. This is actually like my time in Owen's life that I've done the most on. But effectively, what Owen is trying to do here is completely reconsider the way people do theology. Right? So normally, and still to this day, systematic theology books begin with what's called a prolegomena, or a prolegomenon, right? It's just a consideration of what is theology, what are its parts, how do we do it, why is it called that? Usually it's pretty simple. It's heady, but it is not like that long. Owen decides to write one that's 500 pages long because he's at a moment of crisis. And he kind of actually like freaks out a bit. And it's this entire history of theology. It's fascinating and weird and grumpy and extremely learned and brilliant at points. But he literally goes from Adam to the present and considers theology is this divine science of living to God, right? This art of wisdom. How has God changed it over time as he reveals more of itself? And how have people always ruined it? And he says, we have always ruined it. Every successive point in Revelation is attended by more apostasies. The paganism of the ancient times was people the flood was occasioned by a church going astray and devolving into falsehood. And God separated the pure from amongst them and destroyed the rest. And then there was a new revelation given to Noah, and then paganism developed out of that. And then God purified the Jews out of there, and then they fell away, but God kept his people and God sent Christ. And like there's just this continual cascade of God continues to work and his people continue to be unfaithful and fall into new errors and new idolatries because they do not come in faith. And they are not dependent upon the Spirit. And even in our own times, it has been mixed with all sorts of philosophies and corruptions. And he's seeing again at this time another one in the offings, right? Not new revelations, but a continued working of the Spirit, whereby God preserves his people while thousands of the rest fall into apostasy. Right? It's that same old apocalyptic vision, that same old vision that we've seen the last couple of weeks of everything at its fever pitch, the contest between Christ and Antichrist. But now the optimism has gone. Right? Now the vision of this civil war is bringing in the kingdom, this shaking and translating of heaven and earth. Now it's more, there's still some hope, maybe. Now it's a little more bunker down and expect the worst. And in the meantime, we must seek the living God ourselves, purely. But I said, though, there is still some hope, and some hope for him to effect the settlement. So, again, moving on to 1661, there's still this chance, there's still even the likelihood of a Presbyterian settlement or compromise, and it doesn't work, right? To make it simple. There's this conference between some Episcopal leaders and bishops coming back from their, not quite exile, but their ejection, and some leading Presbyterians, including Richard Baxter. And they just, like, the Presbyterians can't get their act together at this point. Like, they can't decide what they want. They can't decide if they're willing to use non-biblical language to define it. Baxter's a big part of that, actually. And if you are already the weak party, right, if your opponents already have the momentum, showing up to the drawing table without a plan doesn't work. So all the momentum goes even more and more towards the Episcopal party. Eventually it becomes clear that if you were ordained in a Presbyterian fashion, you have to be reordained. The liturgy is coming back in some form. So Owen decides to write at this point a discourse concerning liturgies and their imposition. This one he actually publishes anonymously, which is not uncommon at the time, anonymous publication. But it kind of shows us Owen is seeking to hide his tail a little bit. He's a little fearful, even though most people can tell that he wrote it. There's a little bit of covert reputation shaping, legacy forming, right? But he writes a discourse concerning liturgies. And I've mentioned before, right, that people like Owen and Bunyan are probably the most popular of the Puritans, just in terms of like who are people reading today, or who are people reading even multiple works by today. Or I put like Watson up there too, right? He's a little more moderate Presbyterian. He's gone by now. But Owen and Bunyan are two of the most like vocally opposed to the Book of Common Prayer, to even the idea of set prayer. And their opinions are very serious, and we should take them seriously, and they're influential within their own traditions. But let's remember, too, that they don't speak for the entirety of the tradition. Right? There are plenty of Puritan-leaning, Puritan-minded pastors and thinkers who are okay with using the Book of Common Prayer, using set prayers, provided it be not abused, provided that the doctrine within it be proper, and that there's still liberty for extemporary prayers at the right time. Right? So just a little disclaimer before we jump into Owen. He makes three arguments, basically. Set liturgies and prayers are, well, on the one hand, Judaizing. Right? And therefore invalid, because Christ is presently reigning. And Christ is not given to his ministers set forms of prayer. Actually, he even argues at one point in this book against using the Lord's Prayer verbatim. It's quite interesting. But his argument is no, Christ has given to the minister gifts, including the gift of prayer for his congregation. That is something we must count on Christ's present work through the Spirit. And that is a gift which even grows and is strengthened through the exercise, and is entirely set aside if we use set prayers. Right? Does that argument make sense? What do you think of it? I'm curious. Right, that's the argument. Do you think it's valid?
In your own life, how quickly do you find your own prayers devolving into the same word over and over again?
Yeah.
How very common of a kind of temptation. We grow cold. So why would we then want to set in an active where it would help us to freeze our toes? Freeze
Yeah.
our hearts, freeze our everything.
Can become rote, it can become vain, right? With hearts prone to grow cold. Okay, so there's a good argument against. Does anyone want to, I'm curious, does anyone want to speak in defense of set prayers and forms? Anthony. Yeah.
He talked about how helpful it was for him to go through. I believe it was the what's the one that Maynard himself?
Valley of Vision.
Valley of Vision. So he was, I don't know if he was nervous or what exactly, but he would actually write out some of his prayers early in his ministry and sort of kind of study them a little bit, and so his prayer life was after that, he sort of like moved the one to like use that as a jumping off of.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that it is really that different than like Matthew Henry. There's a republication by Banner of Truth as well. Matthew Henry, Ways to Pray, title.
Mm-hmm.
And he uses scripture in a similar way. Rep Heritage also has a nice little book on church prayers. It's really good.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of value in being able to study, consider the prayers of the church fathers, men who come before us, and consider what they, how they prayed, study that. I think scripture in general.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it could be abused,
Yeah.
but there's a richness to considering the prayer life of others, and I don't know that it's really that different than somebody who's. We all have people in our lives that we know that are excellent prayers, and to listen to them, and I don't know that it's really that different from being edified by them and using that as a pattern to pray to God.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that you have to be one way or the other. But
right. Yeah, so there's the danger of frigid roteness, but there's also the value of excellence often comes through imitation, right? And learning through them. I'll confess, this is a battle I'm constantly fighting in my own soul, right? Of even like the frigidity, like when my heart is cold, I need help, right? I need someone to remind me how and what to pray, right? And in times like that, pulling out the value of vision can be really helpful. But at the same time, like I can sink into coldness because I have my prayers planned out in the morning really well. And I'm like, I need to pray for these things on Monday and these things on Thursday and so on. And it's Monday again. Guess I'm going to pray for this. And the heart's not there. Right? It's this constant tension just because we're weak. Right? That's literally the context in which Jesus says the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Is can't you pray for like half an hour? Come on. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Seems like a very good example of how people react to different conflicts or problems in the church. Like in the English context, they were trying to avoid overing.
Mm-hmm.
So they were trying to avoid anything that was revolting others to what they were labeling as overing. The book of prayer was written by faithful reformers. And in other contexts, it seems like culture was the opposite direction.
Yeah. Yeah, there's always the danger, right, of you take your direction, well, you take your tack based on a direction and not on a set of principles, right? If your agenda is, I just want to be as anti-Catholic as possible, that's going to lead you down some dark roads, right? Or if, on the other side, like, again, we see this today, right? Like, my agenda is to be as anti-racist as possible. My agenda is to be as anti-woke as possible. I just want to stick it to the current trends. Nothing healthy lies that way. Or maybe a few healthy things that get you started, but then you end up losing your mind. If all you have is a trajectory and no actual mooring, guiding first principles, you're toast in the long run. Unless anyone consider me squishy for saying that, I'm pulling that right out of G.K. Chesterton. All right, to be fair. Anyhow, yeah. So a good word, right? And it is worth saying, we'll get into this in a second, right? The 1662 BCP like does go harder than the 59, right? And in some ways it surprised people even then. But yeah, so to Owen, it's Judaizing, right? It's not, Christians don't work this way. It's also innovative in a weird way. Like Owen is seeing this goes too far backwards, but also not far enough backward enough. Sorry, that's too many enoughs. It goes too far backward to a pre-Christian era, but also it's not apostolic, right? This is a medieval Romish thing, He actually has a great line about how Romanism came in and Catholicism went out. Right? When you fell into Roman tyranny, the church lost its Catholic purity, which is just a good witty line. But liturgies, therefore, they're at the same time a Judaizing reversion and like a Romish innovation. Right? Think of that vision, right, in the Theologomena, right? Of successive rounds of apostasy. Right? We're still hitting both at the same time. He's also going to make the argument, right? This is just unjust. The liturgies, the discourse does some very interesting things with politics. He actually refers to Charles as our king of blessed memory. He's very pro-monarchical in this argument, but he's willing to draw the line very firmly and say, we must obey in civil matters, but where our obedience is directly towards God, it's always indirectly towards God, right? If you're just obeying the law, but where our obedience is directly towards God, the king has absolutely no say. Right? The king may not impose forms of prayer, nor may Parliament. But they do. He has another book at this time effectively arguing against Catholicism. It's a review of a book that has said, well, like the Catholics actually still say, look at all this chaos that came from multiple denominations and Protestantism and lack of a pope. You guys should just come back to Rome. And he says no. Right? Rome is wrong. Rome has its own innovations. And he has this great line here against the sectarianism that they allege of Protestants. He says, it was not Luther nor Calvin, but the word of God and the practice of the primitive church that England proposed for her rule and pattern in her Reformation. That's what we're sticking to, he says. The problem is that actually has to get translated into actual, like, what does a good English church look like? So let's return to the broader narrative now, because 1662 is coming. The Parliament gives its first bill the Cavalier Parliament, as it's called, signals its intentions in January 1661 with a bill that would have ousted all ministers without episcopal ordination by July. It's probably the work of some well-drilled factions in both the House of Commons and the House of Lords. The eventual settlement that came redefined what was acceptable or orthodox to the Church of England in a way which was far more reaching even than that which was attempted by Archbishop Laud. This is kind of, we've seen this pattern with every party now. The Laudians did it, the Presbyterians did it, the Independents did it, the Church of the Restoration's doing it. They have their plans, they have their agenda, and then they get in their power and they're like, yes, let's do it and more. And it just like, it goes too far, right? The moment they're able to do it, they get carried away. So drastic were these requirements proposed for 62 that many observers felt the settlement could not last, and even the king nursed hopes of diluting or qualifying its terms. Didn't happen. The Act of Uniformity of 1662, I'm just going to read from Spur because he sums it well so well in this paragraph. The Act of Uniformity of 1662 imposed a single form of worship, outlawed other religious denominations, and set out the terms for those who wished to be clergymen of the Church of England. Sectarian divines did not, of course, wish to serve in a national church, and so the 200 of them, these are again your more radical fringe, who had enjoyed preferments in the church or universities, left those posts without demur. But there was a large number, approaching 2,000, a large number of clergymen who would in principle have continued to serve a national church, but refused to serve this church on these terms. Still have hope for the National Reformation, but not this way. The terms caused difficulties in four main areas. For those with Presbyterian orders who had worked as ministers during the 1640s and 50s, the demand that they should submit to an ordination by a bishop was tantamount to reordination. and they simply could not repudiate their own ordinations and their past ministries. 2. Puritan ministers also objected to declaring their unfeigned assent and consent to the prayer book with all its deficiencies and offensive ceremonies, and they resented a set form of worship which totally excluded the use of their own spiritual gifts in extemporary prayer. 3. Swearing to the imperfect government of the church by bishops was a further difficulty. This has been the problem for the last 25 years. Right? Remember the etc. oath. They're willing to work within the structure as long as they're able to still keep conversing and able to still keep pushing for reform. That's not on the table now. Here's the BCP, here's the government, end of conversation. And the fourth, and for many the insuperable obstacle to conformity, was it required the renunciation of the solemn league and covenant. As a solemn oath before God, the covenant was inviolable, but the terms of the renunciation were also unacceptable, since the conformists had to promise not to endeavor any change or alteration of government, either in church or state. Again, about 2,000 ministers could not brook these terms. And they were ejected from their parishes on 24th of August, St. Bartholomew's Day in 1662. And there are now books full of the tearful sermons that they preached to their last preached to their congregations before they were evicted, and before their ministries were discontinued. But again, many of them still hoped for some form of reformation. And the next 27 years or so would see more, their ministries and other forms for many of them, the creative solutions to these problems and further hopes of change. But 24th of August was a very, very dark day for many churches and many saints. Why? Because the Solemn League and Covenant is as long as it's there, you have people who have bound their souls before God to change what you have just done. Right? If we can't work together if you have vowed that everything I've just made permanent, you are opposed to. Right? Yeah. It's like, I mean, even in the PCA, right? We wouldn't ordain someone who said, like, as God is my witness, I'm going to create bishops. Right? Like, flip that. Like, that wouldn't fly. The thing is now that they've said that's not a conversation we're willing to have. Right? Does that make sense? Yeah. Right. So, a dark day. And the end of those attempts. It's hard to kind of bounce from that to discussion, but let's turn now. You have the primary sources. Did everyone get a copy of both in the back? I want to just consider, even before we turn to what Owen has to say, we talked a little bit about this last week. Why did Puritanism, I want to return to it though, because we didn't have enough time to do it justice. Why did Puritanism fail in its aims? Now, as Kathy reminded us last week, right, it didn't fail in God's aims, but in its aims, why? Why was the Church of England not fully reformed? I think maybe let's start some macro level issues that we've seen, just briefly. The political, the institutional. The past 3 weeks, we've seen a lot of these. Oh, yeah, sorry. On the paper hunt. Even just like on the big picture. And that's been the struggle, at least for me, of this series, is managing like the big macro level, like kings and parliaments and universities, with the like pastoring, right, on the very low level. But briefly, even just on the political, on the big events of history, what happens? Where does it all go wrong? Why?
All sorts of pastorally trained staff do these different things.
Yeah. Yeah. You have the problem of pre-existing people and lots of them. Pre-existing people. I don't know a nice way to put that. Right? You inherit a staff. You inherit a parliament. Well, again, there are like 7 parliaments, right? But you inherit a body of clergy and people that you have to work with, and that's hard. Anthony.
It's at least some of the bigger level people that I've read
Mm-hmm.
were really interested in the church in general. It was just a mechanism to be able to support themselves, either to stay in their place, like the Pharisees mentioned, lose our position,
Mm-hmm.
or to use to their benefit in some way. There certainly were people who were interested in seeing the church grow, but a lot of people were just saw it as a means of profit.
Yeah. Not everyone's James Usher, right? Yeah, definitely. Mm-hmm. Right. So yeah, confusion of church and state. And by saying this, I'm not even saying like they're confused, they're wrong. I'm saying like they don't have it all figured out. Right? Everybody is asking new questions. And new questions, when they're important enough and good enough, don't get answered quickly. Right? Remember, it takes the early church like 350 years to get a solid definition of the Trinity. Trying to figure out to renegotiate the relationship between the political and the civil and the spiritual realms in a newly Protestantized country, that doesn't happen fast. We're still debating these things. It's been 400 years. Also, like there's just the level of political chaos, right? You kill the king. That makes it difficult to do things, right? Again, there are a lot of different parliaments and constitutions during this time. Instability like this does not brook or does not cultivate lasting solutions. What?
How much does England's foreign policy towards other countries change? Because how you
Yeah.
deal with your church inside the country is going to have whether directly or indirectly.
Yeah, it does change. I can't speak to how. The 30 Years' War is happening during this as well. But that's beyond the scope of my research. Yeah. No, this is a good question, and I wish I knew the answer, but I don't. Anthony.
I was going to say this is probably a subset of the political chaos. I think one thing when you think about this era, there were a lot of people who went back on their word, which I think is incredibly problematic, particularly that
Mm-hmm.
either at that point, how do you have any faith that anybody really means what they say anymore? Even in, I think the striking thing with that one is it wasn't clear cut like this is the nefarious person who goes back on their word. It was they were faithful Christians who did that.
Yeah.
It's really hard.
Right.
The next iteration comes along, break the word the last thing. Why we get it's about the already established in the last 20 years.
Yeah, that low trust environment. Hard to. Yeah. Okay, so lots of big scale reasons why this doesn't work. But again, right, we want to stay to the heart of Puritanism, and I want to get to these sources. So a lot of it comes down to just sin, right? At the heart of every problem is a problem of the heart, right? And this is seen, right? So again, there's like this whole historical vision, right? The English kind of invent a whole new brand of eschatology during these decades around this. Everything before this is kind of on a Augustinian amillennial consensus, and it's the British really who kind of create this and export this. I wish we had more time to get into that. If that really piques your interest, we can talk later. I can send you some Crawford Gribben, who's made himself a scholar of this. Like Owen still, even into the 1670s, is seeing everything along the lines of Christ and Antichrist, conflict with Rome, and her allies. So there's that whole like apocalyptic vision. But then there are particular sins, right? We've called some of them out already, of just selfishness and oath breaking or dishonesty. We've talked a bit last week about just fighting and devouring one another. Pride. Yeah. Right. Lots going on. I think also, and this is kind of the foil to the self-seeking, the desire for the inner ring. And I'm very, very deliberately drawing on C.S. Lewis. He has an essay just called "The Inner Ring." It's very short. You should read it. But that desire to be part of that group, the us, the we, the people who really know what's going on, who are really getting stuff done here. Right? We've all felt that. It's not. No institution, no society is immune from it. It is not always the same thing as looking for money. Right? Think of Owen's tutor at Oxford. Think back a month now when he first goes there. He started out as a solid reformed guy. There's no monetary change involved. But he starts to compromise. He wants to be part of the moving party. He wants to be part of the people in the know. And he sells his soul effectively. Not for money. But he becomes one of the gates through which the flood of error enters. Lewis, this happens, right, small scale too, right? Lewis talks about, he's speaking, I believe, in this address to a group of young college students. He says, who of you, in the quiet hours of the night, can think back upon this impulse and say with a clear conscience that it led you to anything good? It's nice to be the people in the know. It's hard to go against that. I think a lot of, even, right, it's easy to point out with the people who are the ambitious ladder climbers, right, or the party changers, the skin shifters like Chris Potter. I think also conspiratorial thinking is driven by this. Everyone else is a bunch of sheep. I know what's really going on. I can see behind the headlines. I am secure in my own knowledge. I'm completely vulnerable because I can't do anything about it. But I know. What?
How do you differentiate between there's an actual conspiracy
Yeah.
and thinking of that sort? Do you have any guidelines?
That's a great question. I think John talked about this some, right, in the fear lesson. Because it is hard to walk. Because there are powerful people who do wicked things and who do it in quiet. Right? Often there are, I think Lewis, right, hideous strength, right? There are secret groups of people who are working corruptly and powerfully. I would simply say, in the time that we have, you will know it by its fruit. Is this just working in you a proud knowledge that puffs up and that also makes you terrified? Or is it more of a calm discernment of, oh, this is happening, God help us? Does it lead you to obsess and to fear and to be confident only in your own secret knowledge? Or does it lead you to rely on God and seek his help for things beyond us? Good answer. Yeah.
Don't be given to conspiracies. Don't be given to thoughts.
Yeah.
There's passages like Philippians, those are all the things to consider, meditate on.
Mm-hmm.
The whole concept of be wise, but be innocent.
Yeah.
Flows right into what you were saying.
Good.
There's definitely sin in the world that should be surprising to us. The plot in the garden was a conspiracy of sorts.
Mm-hmm.
But our God is a God over that.
Yeah. Good. All right. Well, I've done it again. I have 5 minutes to discuss 30 minutes worth. Because what you're getting us to, right, in Wyatt, with your very like practical personal dilemma of like, how do I do this good thing without sin ruining it, is the problem here. Again, like we were talking about this yesterday, I love Owen. I really do. I read him for pleasure and profit and regularly. He's a man whom I greatly have benefited from, and whom I think his doctrine, his practice, his pastoral work is of great value, and the Puritans as a whole. Yet at the same time, right, that we've kind of skewed even more than I wish I would have towards the like, oh no, bad things are happening. Briefly, you've got the one-sided thing here. I had to do a bit of copy-paste. Let's note, this is from Owen's treatise on indwelling sin and how to deal with it. In his thesis here, this is from chapter 2, where he's still setting out, still defining his terms. He's pulling from Romans 7, right? The whole treatise is from Romans 7. Sin is a law. Paul says, I find the law of sin within me. What does it mean that sin is a law? Wyatt? Yeah, right. It tells me, it assumes this authority over me and power to command. Power to command, particularly to the bad. But even then, like, sin is holding out to you visions of benefits and harms, right? This is Thomas Brooke, right? Satan's first device to lure the soul into sin is presenting the bait and hiding the hook. Look at this apple. Isn't it beautiful? Isn't it desirable to make you wise? There's no sin that you're lured into on the vision of, oh, this is absolutely terrible, no good will come of it, it will ruin me internally, and now sin lures and entices you by your own desires. Okay, sin is a law. What kind of law? Note this second paragraph. In the italics are kind of giving you the markers there, right? We have to consider what kind of law in particular it is. It is not an outward written commanding directing law, right? Owen's not wanting you to look just at the king's unjust statute, but an inbred, working, impelling, urging law. A law proposed unto us is not to be compared for efficacy to a law inbred in us. And sin lures and entices you by your own desires. It is at work within you. It is in your members. No good, says, dwells within us. And then there's this beautiful passage here where Owen compares that to the law of God. And it says that's the glory of the new covenant. Right? Is now the law of God is not only a law proposed to us, but a law written in us. Right? And engraved on the tablets of our hearts. That happened, right, in the Old Covenant. You can see references to that, particularly the Psalms. But that is the Jeremiah 31. I will put my law within them and write it on their hearts. And the point of conclusion there, as much as I wish we could get into mortification, talk about how to actually deal with that, is that the law of Christ within us, this habit and principle, will have the upper hand and will gain. Right? The new man is being renewed day after day, and the old man is wasting away and being truly weakened at the root, at the habit, by the Spirit of Christ. The Spirit mortifies sin, again, by working in us the contrary, by really working on the sin itself and taking away its power, reducing that law. And now I'm just pulling straight from mortification, by bringing the Spirit brings the cross of Christ into the heart of a sinner by faith and gives us communion with Christ in his death and fellowship in his sufferings. And that ultimately is what wins the day. And so next week we'll consider more of Owen's actual work on this front. Not the prophet, not the politician, but the pastor. In his final decades as a minister, and we'll even look more at his considerations of the glory of Christ. So Anthony, would you close us in prayer?